Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Simone Eiman, former member of William Branham's Message Cult. Simone, it's good to have you and to talk through your experience in William Branham's message. I understand that you were raised in it for a very long time, and I'm interested to hear your story. And maybe if you could just start by introducing yourself.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, John. It's lovely to be here. Yes, I'm all the way in South Africa. That's where I grew up. And at a very young age in primary school, I think we call it junior school, my parents found the message, and we started. I think I was about 8. My siblings were much younger than that, and that has pretty much been our psychological formation, and mental basis for our childhood. Very strict, very strict. And I say that in bold and capital letters. And I think everybody who's in this religion can identify with that. So it's been a long journey for me to undo all that, undo the programming, undo the conditioning. And it's taken me most of my life. And that's why I wanted to share my story with you, because your podcast has been the catalyst for my letting go. Because since childhood, I've always wondered, and I've always had this feeling within, this is not right. If I am a creation of God, why is this man beating up on me? Why am I such a bad thing or a bad person just because I'm a woman? I could never understand that. And I never got revelations, and I never got, filled with the Holy Spirit and all that kind of stuff, because I never got it. So I eventually literally stumbled upon the podcast and thought, oh my God, all the stuff that I've been thinking and feeling here, they're talking about it now.
Wow.
and here I thought, oh my word. And I would always ask myself, what are they saying? When they're preaching, and they weren't saying anything. It was just loud voices and lots of prayer and all of that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-religion, or I'm not an atheist or anything like that. But the theatrics and the drama just never got. It just didn't do me. So I want to acknowledge the work that you are doing with very deep gratitude. That you do it in a very methodical manner, and there's no malice. And I appreciate that, and thank you. I want to publicly acknowledge that and thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for joining to share your story. For people like you and I, it's a little bit different than other people. I do have emotions. I have very, very heightened emotions. However, when I was in the church setting, my emotions are the type of sympathy and empathy. That's my type of emotions. Whenever something happens, I cry like a baby if something happens that is very emotional, even still today as a grown adult. But in those settings, I never got into the hype. I never got into, like you said, theatrics. I never really understood those types of emotions, because my personality, it doesn't work with my personality. And
no.
You mentioned before recording that you were a coach. I sat down with a personality coach for one of my clients, and they had this big contract that the client required personality tests because they would join people with compatible teams. And this was a wonderful thing. I mean, this is phenomenal what they were doing. But the personality coach actually called me aside and said, John, your empathy is so off the scale that you will literally kill yourself for another person. You need to be careful of this. And I said, yes. And she went on to tell me different things about myself that I guess I knew, but I never really thought about them until she said this. But one of the things that she said, there's a category that people have in the old psychological days. They used to call this category religion, and they can't call it this anymore because of all of the politics around that. But there is a category in which you believe something without having any evidence. And there are people that go into this, and it was categorized falsely as religion. They've recategorized it as basically logic. And my logic side is really high. My empathy is really high, but taking blind leaps of faith is not. And so I, like you, I was in this world. What is this world? How do people do this? But I'm very interested to hear your story, because the things that we were told in the United States about what happened in Africa, I'm learning from other people like you that it really doesn't match the story that we had here. William Branham goes to Africa, and we were told that all of these miraculous healings were undeniable. And then we come across this book, I think it's 1955, by Wayman Doyne Miller. And he visited, he was right there in the front of the platform and saw people that he knew and went home and watched those same people die. And so this was a big deal back then. It never really, that information never made it to the States. So had the revivals been what they were advertised, you would expect all of Africa would be converted to this. Why would you not? And yet, logically, my brain is, I did think about this in the message. My brain is thinking, no, wait a minute. If the miracles were as they described and everybody could not deny them, this would be this massive movement that would overtake the whole continent. And yet it did not. So, and I'll let you talk in just a second, but I combined that thought recently with a podcast I'm doing by Bob Scott, something that I'd never really thought about. In the developing nations, and even in South Africa during some of the early years, you could hold a revival and you could invite everybody to come with free food, and you'd have people coming by the truckloads from miles and miles around. Bob said that he witnessed this. And so what happens is you get these revivalists that go and they take these pictures of 100,000 saved, and they're not telling you, it's more like 100,000 fed.
I can't talk much to the doctrines and the intellectual side of things, because it never made sense to me, and I can't tell you. I never understood it. I never understood serpent seed and thunder, and I never did. And my dad used to be the front man for all my questions. He never shut me down. He was very tolerant, and he always, and I think the questions I used to ask him made him think. And I mentioned earlier, I asked him, if I was so useless as a woman, why did God give me a fully functioning brain? And he just sat there looking at me. I think I was like 13 or 14 years old, because you were always told, you must be quiet and you must be, do this and don't do that. Just sit and play the piano when I ask you to, and do what you must do, and go and study, and all of that. And I never understood that. And he just sat looking at me, and he probably thought, I hope he thought, well, she's got a point. Because why? Why? And if my female form was so wrong, why do I have this form? And why do men not take responsibility for their own thoughts and their own actions? Why am I being held responsible for their thoughts and their actions and feelings? And that's just logical thinking. It wasn't being anything else. It was just logical thinking. So I was thinking earlier about, just getting myself into the zone for our conversation around what was the environment like when I was growing up? And it was like a policing environment. Apart from, the pastors and the deacons and all the officials in the church, the congregation themselves were like pseudo policemen. Because dare you be seen by someone doing something that you were not supposed to, you're going to hear about it tonight. Whether it was right or wrong, and that just living in that fear, it was so fear-driven. And one of the part that I struggled with to let go of was that fear. Fear that, what if it is right? There's this one story that they tell about Branham had spoken to someone, and the lady said she wouldn't even feed this to her cow or something like that. There was a story like that. I don't know if it was manufactured by our leaders or if it's true. And I thought, well, if that can happen to the cow, then what can happen to me? If I say anything wrong or dare I go, against this. And I struggled with that for a long time. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. And it's taken me, I left home when I was 21. So the best part of 2 decades plus, I've been trying to release this and trying to shake, finally reaching a point where I can say, I don't follow that anymore because I don't believe that it's the truth. And I have a different relationship with God. I'm not religious. I don't follow institutionalized religion because I don't believe in it. It's just a method to control people. But I am spiritual, I do take care of my spirituality and compassion for others. You spoke about empathy. That was something that I never saw in the church, compassion and empathy for others, because it was them and us. And if I saw someone outside of the circle who was struggling, who needed something to eat, who needed some money, or I would give that. It's just humanity. It wasn't about religion. So that charity and that heartfelt, just basic human love, I didn't experience that, and it bothered me. Yeah, so I can talk about this for hours because I can talk about it now. I'm not afraid.
Well, and it's funny talking to you because it's like I'm talking to a mirror image of myself. What you just described is your thought process. So whenever I was leaving the cult, I went through several very severely traumatic events, life-changing events that happened that really shook me. And it was very difficult. But I'm a songwriter, I'm a musician, if you can't tell by my background. And I kept getting song after song coming to me. I've mentioned this, I think, before, but one of the themes that kept coming was, why are we preaching to save the saved? Why are we not preaching to save the lost? Because it was exactly like you described. It's always a preaching at. It's a preaching, you don't do this, you don't do this. And look at the outside world. They're doing this. We're different than them. It's us versus them. It wasn't I feel so sad and sorry for these people who are not going to make it to heaven with us. Let's try to help them. Let's try to change them. And that thought it was killing me. It was burning me because, like I said, I'm filled with empathy and I'm sad for this, the sins of the world, like the Bible says to be. And I'm hearing sermons where, no, I have to be this rude and arrogant and, judgmental person. And it really was outside of my personality to be that. And then after I left, it wasn't until early versions, I started the support groups, and I'm working with people who have escaped. And some of the females, everybody's talking with each other, and they're talking about what they suffered through in the cult. And some of the females, I was watching their conversations, and they were saying, yeah, it was so hard for me. And they're explaining all the reasons why it's hard, and suddenly it hit me. Not only was I arrogant and a jerk to the people who were outside of the message, we were arrogant and completely in the wrong to the females in the cult. And I felt guilty for this. So this led me down a journey where I'm reading the Bible over and over and over to wash all this out of my head. And one passed through, what I did, I made these mental lists of things that I would pay attention to as I read from cover to cover. One of the things was, okay, what are the women's role in the Bible? And I find great women like Deborah, who led the whole nation, well respected by Israel. And I'm thinking, how does that apply and fit with this thing that we call the message? It just can't fit. Yeah. And like you said, the version of God that they have versus the version we have now. I started studying the ancient cults and mythologies and how they worshipped, and I noticed it was always this God of fear, and you may have to sacrifice your child, you may have to give up everything that you have, you may die because of this God if he hates you. And that's the God we had. We had a God that hated us, not a God of love. And as you're reading through the New Testament, it says perfect love casts out all of this fear. Yet we were in a message that the perfect love caused more fear, and we were told, quote unquote, perfect love. So many of the things that you described, like that was my journey almost exactly.
Yeah, and you know, in sharing this and talking about it's been such a freeing, a liberating process for me, and that is why I reached out to you to connect and talk about this and let others know that you have worth just because you are. You have worth, regardless, female, male, in between, whatever. You have worth just because you are. And that's something that I've had to embody for myself because it was taken away from me. It was coded out of my normal functioning. And I have worth, regardless of my gender. I have a fully functioning brain that I can use and that I've been given and that thinks differently and that you know can do things. And everybody has that. And there is life after fear. But you have to be brave enough to hold the hand of those who are offering it to you to take that step if you can't do it on your own. And sometimes we sit in a corner and we think, oh, nobody understands. Nobody knows what I've gone through. They just won't get it. Oh, we get it. We get it, you know. And there are so many groups out there and so many people out there who are supporting. You know, I follow several podcasters. The one, you know, quite a few. I can't really get to the names now. And it's not just, you know, this cult that people are trapped in and that have such severe damage to their psyche and to themselves. But this has been, you know, put as it's the one true message. And if you don't follow this, you know, you are eternally lost. And our families are broken because, you know, you are judging them because they are now in the message. And it happened in my family. We wouldn't see our cousins and aunts and uncles because they didn't believe it. And I'm like, but we are family. Don't we just, you know, can't we just all get along? But as a child, you're not allowed to challenge. You know, I would challenge my dad when we were alone together. I was daddy's girl, as you could probably have made up, you know, gathered. So I would challenge him when we were alone, but I dare not challenge my mom or any of the other elders in the family or in the church. So, yeah, it is, and I see with my siblings, you know, the scars are still there, but it's not a journey that I can take for them. I can just hold out my hand for them to reach out if they need to. But the damage it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart.
It's difficult. And whenever I first started doing this, I don't know if you know this history or not, but I had a different YouTube site, and the YouTube site name matched my website. The cult attacked it and brought it down because they did not want all this information to be out. But as I was going through this journey and I'm, reading the Bible, I'm trying to make sense of it, I was finding differences between what we were taught and what I was reading, and I would, put these little 15 to 30 minute clips of me talking about, I found this difference. This is interesting. And I was just putting these things out there. They weren't anything significant. It wasn't until I put out the information about Jim Jones and People's Temple, of the People's Temple Massacre, that's when they really got heavy, attacking me. But as they're going through that journey, I lost a lot of those videos, so much of this doesn't exist. But it was funny because I'm going through that thought process, thinking about, I'm just deeply troubled by how we treated women, myself included. We treated women horrifically, and we treated people with black skin, of different varieties of black skin. We treated them very poorly. And I'm feeling really guilty for this, and I'm going through the Bible and I'm reading, and things were hitting me that there, we have the cult's loaded language, but we also have the cult's loaded and pre-programmed Bible verses. We would read this verse, and you didn't even have to say all of the cult loaded language. You just said the verse name, book and name, and verse number. And one of those verses said that I will pour my spirit out on all flesh. Your sons and daughters will see visions. You probably know the passage. And I got to thinking, what would happen if a daughter were to have actually prophesied or said that she saw a vision in this movement? They would shut her down immediately. And that's what the Bible is saying is going to happen, right? So I'm scratching my head thinking, how does that work? How does that matter? And then I got to thinking about the cult's hierarchy, the fivefold ministry hierarchy. There's all of the rank and file members at this bottom tier. And then you had the pastors who were like governors. They were more like policemen, like you said. They wanted to govern and make sure that you kept the standards of the cult. And at the very top of our cult was a prophet, who we kind of combined prophet and apostle in the message cult. But the funny part about that is, then I got to thinking about the fivefold ministry. If Ephesians is correct, and these are the 5 types of people that will be helping the church grow and learn more about Jesus, what happened to the 5, and why is it a hierarchy? Why is it a tiered structure with authoritarian control? And then I'm studying Branhamism and how, in the beginning he was kind of supportive of this, but then towards the end, can you imagine if some young man were to say, I have the gift of teaching and I want to be a teacher in this movement? No, you must listen to how the prophet taught. I want to be an evangelist, and I want to go to well, you need to go to the cult headquarters because they're going to instruct you of what the prophet taught. So it's like they have no leading of the Holy Spirit. You have to go to the prophet as your Holy Spirit. So this led me down crazy paths, but it got to the point where I was thinking, in essence, this movement had taken the role of the Holy Spirit that's in the scriptures, and they'd applied that entire role to this dead guy from 1965. And how does that help me to have a dead Holy Spirit from 1965?
You've just triggered a memory for me earlier on in that segment where you spoke about, precognitive or prophesying or whatever. When I was a child, about my second or third year of school, maybe I was about 9 or 10, 8 or 9 or somewhere around there, I used to have dreams. Now, for an 8 or 9-year-old child in this kind of religious environment, I would dream things and it would happen. And for an 8 or a 9-year-old, it started off with my grandparents, one of my grandparents. I dreamt my granny had passed. And it hurt me because, she was in Namibia and we were in South Africa, and it's so far and we only see her once a year. So a few days later, we got the news that my gran had passed. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I just kept quiet because I thought, the fact that I dreamt it before means that I caused this. And I just kept mum, I didn't say anything. And then a while after, same thing happened. My father's brother. And a few days later, we got the news. Cousins came to town. And I got really scared. And then I was, and then it started being in my conscious state as well. I would almost like see like little movies. And I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. I was so petrified. I couldn't tell anybody because they're going to blame me. They're going to say I'm causing these people's death, and these are my family. And I shut it down. Somehow I shut it down. I was able to shut it down, and I never, I would dream a lot, but I would just ignore it. And only now in my adult life that started coming up again. Where I'm very sensitive and I can pick up on people's emotions and I'm dreaming again. And it's not wrong. It's not something that I'm, cooking up at night and stuff like that. I'm quite comfortable talking about it now because it's not manufactured. It's something that just happened. But that fear, from childhood, I'm a girl. Now, if I had to come up with this and say, oh, well, I saw that accident was going to happen, they'd be like, oh, shush, man, what, just hush, you don't know anything. But I saw it. Someone we had gone out for a family picnic and I saw the accident and she died. That's scary stuff, for a young child and with nobody to talk to. I see your supervisor just walked in there.
My dog is walking around. He hears my son who's out getting ready to mow the lawn. You and I are so much alike. It's unbelievable. And I want to emphasize something you said because there's a aspect to what you said that I also experienced that people don't understand who don't have this type of thing. So I've mentioned this briefly. I don't want to talk about it too much because in these types of movement, people start worshiping you if they sense that you can have any kind of spiritual thing.
Yep.
I had the same thing. I had dreams and I would watch things happen after my dreams. Not all of them, but sometimes. And I think I have mentioned this. This is the only one that I have mentioned. I had this dream. We were sort of estranged from my grandfather, the pastor of the Branham Tabernacle, for years. And I had this dream about him. And as a child, I'm thinking, why am I having this dream? I don't know. I really don't know my grandfather. We moved kind of from coast to coast, and I just hadn't seen him for a long time. But I had this dream, and I walked into his house, and I turned to the right, and I walked into this room, and I saw my grandfather watching television, which in the cult, if you know, the cult is different now, but if you know back then, this would be unbelievable. There's no way that the pastor of the Branham Tabernacle is watching television. And he preached, he scolded people who did this every Sunday. It was like like you said, it was the fear. Don't do this, don't do this, don't watch the television. That's a hell in a box. He had all these terms. So as a child, I had this dream and I thought, well, that's kind of silly. And not much longer after that, my dad announces, we're going to go visit grandfather for the first time in a while. I go to his house. The first thing I did when they welcomed me, everybody else went to the kitchen to talk, and I darted over to that room, and what did I see but a television? It wasn't like a television with antennas, but he had a VCR and movies galore. And I'm like, I'm looking around thinking, no, this can't be. This just can't be. And I later learned that William Branham had not just one television in his house, but many televisions in his house. His children had televisions. Pretty much everything that the Branham family condemned, they were doing. They had swimming pool in their backyard. We were told, swimming, you can't have these swimming parties. And I have family that attended his swimming parties. And so that was the first time I kind of experienced that. But I wanted to say all of that to say this. Number one, that doesn't make me special in any way. Number two, the difference between what happens when people really have something like this and what you see with these stage acts like William Branham, it's always, I did this. I had this happen. Come follow me because I had this thing. But when it happened to me, it was more like, this is very personal. This isn't for other people. I don't even think I told my parents. I think all of these years, the first time I mentioned that was probably a year ago on the podcast. I've kept it to myself because this is for me. This is between God and me. If this is God speaking, which to this day, I don't know if that was God speaking to me or if it was this weird coincidence, because what do I do with this information? My grandpa has a television. But in either case, it was a personal thing. It wasn't so that people would come and follow me and worship me. So I kept it to myself. And years later, now that I'm going through all of these different ministries and I'm reading through the Voice of Healing magazine, which is basically a generator of stage acts, and they're all doing the same things that I did as a child, or saying that they are, but they're using it and saying, come follow me. I did this thing. And it's so backwards from the way it is. If it's real, it is backwards what they're doing. Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the New Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support.
To latch on to that about being real and authenticity, the other thing that really, really struck me as a young adult and as a child was the hypocrisy as well. And, the leaders, the so-called leaders and the senior people in the following or in the religion around the country, you have these celebrity preachers who visit and everybody attends because Pastor so-and-so is preaching today. Same stuff. I never got it. I would always make an excuse not to go to church because I never understood. And my dad would always just give me that look and he was like, come on, you got to go. And I'm like, but I don't feel well. Like, you were fine yesterday. And anyway, I'd go and because I need a house and I need food to eat and, someone to pay my bills. So, I'd hear about, when we were much older now, I'd hear about, so-and-so was indecent with his daughter or with the child, foster child. Or whatever. I'm like, so what are they going to do about it? What are the repercussions? Because that's wrong. That's what's been done to her. And it's just always swept under the carpet. And my dad used to get very angry about it, and he would, when we were much older, not when we were very young, but when we were older, in our late teens, early, young adulthood, he would tell us, and he was starting to get very, I could see him starting to pull away in the late years, and we'd hear so-and-so did this, and so-and-so, did this, and this child was abused, and that child was abused. I know of very many, of a few people who were abused, who I only learned about later, but didn't know at the time. And I thought, but these are Christian men. Why are they doing this? But if you think about how they've been programmed around women. A girl child or a female child means nothing because that's still a woman. And then I wonder, what about your own children? How do you feel? Do you think that about your daughters? You have 3 daughters. Do you think that about your daughters? Those were really difficult conversations to have alone in your head because it was wrong on every level, religious, ethically, morally, right across the board. It was just wrong. But nothing came of it.
And the sad part of it is the general population of the cult had no idea of many of these things. Only those people who were directly connected to them. And I would watch as some of these people, they would get quote unquote restored to their ministry or however they called it. So they continued, and they're predators. They're still continuing as a predator. And the way that the message works, people, William Branham is dead, so they'll sit so long under one pastor, and they'll get tired of this because there is no pastor that can reconcile all of the different contradictions in doctrine. And so they'll go on their one doctrinal path, and they'll try to be consistent with this. Well, some of the listeners will recognize, well, wait a minute, William Branham said the total opposite of what he said, fully unaware that William Branham said both things. So the minister thinks he's preaching Branhamism, they think they're preaching against him, and then they migrate to another church. Well, some of the churches that they migrate to might have one of these predators. And I remember thinking, not long before we started to leave, I started thinking about the way that they attacked the Catholic Church. They really didn't attack it based off of doctrine or anything of substance. They attacked it simply because they're covering up sex scandals. We would hear this often. Watch what the Catholic Church does. Look at the skeletons in their closet. We would hear these sermons like this. Well, I'm sitting there, and I know some of the same things are happening in the cult that we were in. So I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. How is that right? How can we condemn them when we're doing the same exact thing? And then it was interesting because I'll never forget, after I left, I started paying a little bit closer attention to world politics and religion in general, and I started watching the Catholic Church started reforming in many areas. And this was one of the areas that largely they started reforming. It still exists. It is a problem that will exist in any denomination of faith, Message, Catholic or not. But they're making an attempt to correct this. And I'm watching the cult that we left. There is no attempt. They're not even acknowledging that it exists. And the problem is when you enable predators and you keep restoring them to their ministries, and then they continue with their predatory nature, you're going to always have victims. So after I went through all of this journey, I'm thinking, I'm so glad I pulled my children out of this. Not for just the sake of my children, but my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. What if they were to accidentally migrate to one of these places? It's horrific.
And, added to that, there's in the society that I grew up in, there was this classism, if that's the right word to use. And you had the elite, you had the national elite, and then you had the local elite, and then you had, the middle sort of layer, and then you had the not middle layer. And it wasn't a very overt thing. It was very subtle. But I used to pick up on it. And my mom is a very compassionate human, very, very generous spiritually, and she used to be that champion for the forgotten. Often, we'd have to be, instead of being out with our friends on a Saturday, we'd have to be making grocery parcels because we need to, take it to the sisters and to, whomever. But there weren't active drives, charity drives or, bring an extra tin of beans or an extra loaf of bread, or for those who are struggling. There was none of that. It was individuals who would do that. And I always used to wonder, look at, the churches. I used to attend a Catholic school because they had a music school. So I used to do piano, and I used to attend the Catholic school. And the charity drive there used to embarrass me because I called myself a Christian, but we never used to do that. As a family, we would do that. I'm not saying that nobody in the church or in the community wasn't charitable, but it wasn't an active thing. And for me, if I have a plate of food every night, I would like to think about somebody else as well and share my plate of food with somebody else. Because there are those people in society who don't have, enough. And I wondered about that, and people would be driving flashy cars and living in fancy houses and justifying why that was okay. But the charity wasn't there.
Charity wasn't there. And like I said, I did this process of self-examination after leaving. I wanted to make myself better. I realized that I was in this thing that was making me worse. I wanted to be better. And we tried many different denominations after leaving. I don't know that we'll ever settle on anything. I'm kind of like you. It's more of a personal thing. It's not about an organization or anything like this. But one of the ones that we tried, simply because it was one that was so strongly condemned, was the Methodist Church. If you know the history, the Methodists were strongly condemned because they were, quote, cold and formal. That was the cold and formal church, right? So we went, and the first thing that hit me was they were so far less cold and formal than the Message Church was that we were in. Yeah. The Message Church, you had to be rigid and structured, and you go into the church service, it was like a bunch of robots. That's what it felt like. Yeah. And then I go to this place, and they were respectful, yet they were not cold towards you, and anybody's welcome. You can come in. But here locally, they support the homeless. There's a large homeless community in this area, and that was one of their primary initiative, is to go help the homeless. And they would go try to get other churches to donate and help the people who have no food, who have no shelter. Mm-hmm. And it's right here in the heart of this area. You can't get anybody who's in the Message cult to acknowledge that this exists because they're in the cold and formal church. Mm. And then it really sunk in whenever we had this series of tornadoes that hit this area, and it just tore through. My brother-in-law lost everything. They just happened to be hunkered down into the bathtub, and the whole house was ripped around away from them as they're in the bathtub. That's how bad this was. There were people who died, and the cult headquarters put out this statement: not a single believer was killed in this thing. And I'm reading this while reading the news. Wait a minute, there were Christians who were killed. This hit the community. There were Christians who lost everything. And they did have an initiative to help and support, but it was centralized only to the people who believed in William Branham. If you believe Branham, we'll help you rebuild your house. If you don't, we won't. That was basically what it was. And that really hit me hard, because I recognized that when I was in it, my mindset was the same way, and I would have not seen any problem with this. I would have thought that I was doing God a service, but in effect, I'm denying everything that Jesus said about how to treat people and how to treat others. And I realized that this is not me. I cannot be like this.
They talk about the ABCs. I don't know if it's a general thing or if it was just, the lexicon in our community. The ABCs of Christianity and whatever. That's ABC of Christianity is charity. And it's just acknowledgement, or acknowledging another human being without race, without religion, without dogma, anything. It's just fellow human. Brotherly love, they call it. That's it. And these are the basics. that I used to question. I never questioned the dogma or the beliefs and the doctrines and all, because I never understood it. It never made sense to me, so I never understood it. I never questioned it. But the basics are what I questioned. And when I was about 19 or 20 years old, my father decided to leave, and the father, the head of the house, and if the father says we don't go, we don't go. So there was a thing between, I don't know what happened between them, him and the pastor and the upper echelons of the management team. There was lies about my sister and I. I mean, I don't want to go into the details of it. And it was said to be, thus saith the Lord. It wasn't the truth, but it was said that it was true. And that was the turning point for me, that I'm done. If my dad kicks me out of the house now, that's okay. I'm going to find a job. I'll go somewhere, but I'm not going back, because it's not true. But my father decided that no, he's also had enough. We don't know the full story. My father's now passed away a long time ago. My mom won't tell us. And it's okay, because I don't really need to know. But that was the turning point, and then I decided, well, I'm going to leave, because we lived in a small town in the northern part of Natal, which is near Durban, just to give you some context, if you know the South African geography. And I decided to leave home, and I moved to Cape Town. And I've been here for the past 33 years, and I've never regretted it. And this is where I've been through my cleansing process, my deconditioning and unprogramming process, away from, because I didn't move from Newcastle to Cape Town to a message community. I didn't move to a message community. And what I noticed when I got here was these non-message people are so kind to me. They are so generous, and it's through them that I made it, their support. And we were taught that they don't have your best interest at heart. You can't trust them. They're not people of the Lord. And yet it's these non-people of the Lord that helped me, get to eventually stand on my own 2 feet. Because leaving home as a 21-year-old, I was still very naive, very immature, because we had been raised in such a protected community. So I had to learn how to be an adult on my own, with all these worldly people. And I turned out all right,
Yeah, that feeling was overwhelming for me, because I'll never forget, we were in one of the churches that we attended. I won't give the names, but we were in a Sunday school. And Sunday school for me growing up was, we're going to sit and listen to a man who's telling us stories of how blessed he was to be near the prophet during the days when the prophet was alive. That was Sunday school. You might hear a Bible verse. I think most of the cult churches did open with reading of the Psalms. They would read a verse, then the congregation would read. It would do this sort of thing. But then the whole rest of Sunday school wasn't learning the Bible. It wasn't what is actually Sunday school. It was literally stories that, and if you go to a church long enough, you hear the same stories like 5 times. And I wanted to hear more. Well, we're attending this church, and they're having Sunday school, and I'll never forget it. It was like a classroom. They had this board up this, it wasn't a chalkboard, it was one with the pens where you could write. And they would say, now we're going through this passage in this book from the Old Testament, and now Egypt is right here, and he would draw like a map, and over here you have he's describing all the nations, and he's talking about these people believed and worshiped this pagan god, and these people worship this other. I mean, it was making it come alive to me. And I was sitting there just in complete awe that, how did I miss this growing up? All we heard were these stories of this dead guy. And so I'm listening to this, and towards the end, they would always have somebody pray. Well, one time, they called in this lady to pray who just happened to be wearing shorts. And I looked over at her, and I'm out of this mindset. I no longer even have a problem with women wearing shorts at that point in time. But when I saw it in a church setting, I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I listen? What's the protocol here? Because I was raised that way, right? And then she prayed this prayer. She started crying in the middle of it, praying for the sins of the city, and how she wished that every single person could know the God that she knows and be saved. And how can we help these people? How can we reach them? What can we do? Show us the way to help more people. That was her prayer. And I felt so little in that moment. I'm trying not to get emotional now, but I realized what a bigot I was, what a fool I was. My entire life, 37 years I was in this, and I was so arrogant. I thought others were lesser than me. We were the elite, like you said. And here's a person who I'm taught to condemn in a church that I'm taught is cold and formal, and I should condemn. And yet they're the opposite of cold and formal. These are really, really good people. What do I do with this information, right? And we tried multiple churches. We tried, still, like I said, I don't think we'll ever land anywhere, but we tried several after this, and every one that we tried, it was the same way. Not a single one was as cold and formal as the cult we had left. So it is a life-changing difference, and I'm so glad that you went through it. If you could go back in time and give some encouragement to your younger self who's struggling with this analytical mind like I had and all of these thoughts, and what advice would you give yourself? What encouragement would you give yourself?
Keep pushing through. What you see is what you see, and it's not wrong. Keep pushing through and listen to yourself. Listen. Because we all have that little voice within us, and you can call it whatever you want to call it. The Holy Spirit or your whatever. Listen to it. Because I do believe that we go through our life journey for a reason. If my life journey had been cushy and soft and marshmallowy and no issues, then I would not have been forged into who I am today. And none of us would be forged into who we are today because of what we've come through. And I see this pathway as a forge, because now I can sit and have a conversation with you with very little emotion in terms of anger or resentment or anything like that towards the people that I've been referring to or that I've been talking about. And it's about honoring the forge that has brought you to where you are today. And I believe that there's a reason why you and I are having this conversation today, why you and I forget your colleague. Charles, yes. Why you are doing the work that you are doing to bring to light what's been going on. And you had to go through that in order to be able to bring this to light and to be able to understand when somebody has a conversation with you, say, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my entire community. I'm afraid I'm afraid I'm going to lose everything I know if I leave. You understand that because you've gone through that. There's purpose in it.
It was difficult, and at times it's still difficult. We recently lost my mother-in-law, and when my family cut me off, my mother-in-law became my new mother. So for the past, since 2012, I have leaned very strongly. She was my support pillar. She too was able to escape the message, and it's very difficult at times, but at the same time, in many ways, it's less difficult. Even through all of the pain that we went through and all of the people cutting us off, what I tell people whenever they leave this is, yes, it's going to hurt. It's going to be the hardest thing that you've ever done. But if you work hard and build a new community of people, you'll find that there are people who will stick by you no matter what happens. You could do something that even offends them, and they will still stick with you. We never had this in the cult. And it was very evident by how quickly we were cut off. So it was difficult, and I'm glad that you were able to come through. I'm glad that myself, my family, my children were able to escape this and learn how good life can be if you don't live, like I'm speaking on my behalf, not yours, but if you don't live as an arrogant person, how good life can be. It's so much better. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it's really been lovely chatting to you. And I just want to say one thing, though. Don't beat yourself up about, how you were programmed to be. You had no control over that. You now have control over the choices that you make. And when I'm coaching or when I speak to people and I talk to them about, or they talk to me about, well, how could he be so cruel, and how could he be this, and he did this, and he did that to me? And I said, okay, let's look at it from a different perspective. Look at it from the perspective of he was taught to be that way. He was taught to be dominant. He was taught that he was to dominate and to be the head of the household. And what does that mean to him? And when you look at it from that perspective, the man is as much a victim of the programming as we, the women on the receiving end, are. You didn't know better. Now you do. Now that you do know better, I might judge you if you do something differently now.
Hopefully I won't be arrogant to you now.
No, you're nothing. Arrogance is not a word I would use.
Well, thank you so much. If you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion, From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.